Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. A frantic drumming against my ribs tore me from sleep's embrace. Pitch black pressed against the tent fabric, visibility 0. My watch face glowed faintly. 2:07 a.m. Hours until dawn, hours until the sunrise shoot. I'd trekked into this desolation for capturing the raw drama of these peaks, the shadowed mouths of caves nestled in their folds. Remote, untouched, precisely why I'd chosen it. Yet something felt intrinsically wrong, a dissonance in the deep silence. Then I heard them. Thin, serrated ribbons of sound slicing through the night, echoing off the stony inclines. Not close, but far too near for comfort. Screams. With painstaking quiet, I worked the tent zipper. The air that rushed in was a physical blow, frigid, arid, carrying the scent of ancient dust and shattered pine needles. I held my breath, listening. Again the cries came, less human now, more akin to high, keening howls, yet retaining just enough familiarity to prickle the skin along my spine. I slid from the sleeping bag's warmth, pulling on boots, zipping my jacket, my fingers clumsy, trembling from the cold or the adrenaline surging like a tide. Outside, the sky arched vast and clear. A gibbous moon hung snag behind the serrated peaks, casting long, deceptive shadows across the broken terrain. My breath plumed white in the gloom. Fumbling, I located my small flashlight, its beam a weak comfort. My camera bag followed, clutched like a talisman, though its purpose felt suddenly irrelevant. I moved towards the sound, each footfall a betrayal on the loose scree and patches of brittle earth. Crunch. Pause, listen. Crunch. The cries ricocheted, phantom sounds thrown between the slopes, making direction a maddening guess. Loud, then faint, then piercingly loud once more. I pushed onward, guided by instinct more than certainty. Minutes stretched thin. Then the sound warped. Layered beneath the shrieking now was laughter, a hollow, sexless resonance that tightened my stomach into a knot. Not joy, not malice, just vacant, alien amusement. A narrow track materialized, twisting between monolithic boulders, ascending a slight rise. The path was rough, demanding attention, yet the stark moonlight etched the mountain silhouettes and the textured rock faces with crystalline clarity. My own steps hammered loud in the stillness. A constant prickle at my back suggested unseen company. My flashlight beam swept nervously side to side, animated the darkness. Shadows writhed like crouching figures near the stones, dissolving into mere rock and void under direct light. Illusions, hopefully. Ahead, a glow manifested, not the warm flicker of a campfire, but a weak, diseased-looking gray luminescence, seemingly sourceless. I crept closer, hugging the shadows, trying to muffle my breathing. The breeze sharpened, biting, dropping the temperature until my exposed face and hands stung. A low, guttural moan rose and fell, swallowed by the silence. Then the laughter echoed again, fainter now, more distant. My mouth was sandpaper. The trail spilled into a small, natural amphitheater. Before me gaped the entrance to a cave, the rock around its maw jagged, weeping dark streaks of moisture. I played the flashlight beam across the opening. From deeper within, a pale glimmer pulsed irregularly. I stood frozen at the threshold, listening. The screams had ceased, but a palpable wrongness emanated from the dark, a crawling sensation under my skin. The urge to turn, to flee back to the fragile shelter of my tent, warred with a potent cocktail of morbid curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty to understand. Hesitantly, I stepped inside. The air within was instantly colder, a subterranean chill that felt distinct from the night outside. It smelled of damp, time-worn stone and dormant moss. Water dripped with maddening persistence, each drop a tiny percussion on the rock floor. My flashlight beam painted the walls, revealing primitive figures rendered in faded ochre, charcoal, umber. Elongated, stick-thin humanoids stood amongst strangely proportioned animals, deer-like yet somehow distorted. Arms were raised, reaching. In some tableaus, figures pursued beasts. In others, the animals circled the humans. I traced a line with a fingertip. The pigment felt fused with the stone, smoothed by eons of damp air. How old? Whose hands? I scanned for recent signs, footprints, discarded trash, but found only dust. My own boot prints stood stark and solitary in the thin layer coating the floor. A sudden, stronger draft, icy as a submerged stone, brushed the nape of my neck, a touch without substance. I jerked, spinning, flashlight beams slashing wildly. Nothing, just rock and shadow. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Too fast, my breathing calmed down. My palms felt slick. I set the camera bag on a flat ledge near the wall, freeing a hand, steadying the light. The cave passage sloped downwards ahead. From that descent emanated the grayish glow, flickering now, uncertain, like a failing bulb. Turn back. The thought screamed silently, but then my name. Not shouted, not whispered, but somewhere in that liminal space between, a low, rasping voice. It stretched the final syllable, tasting it. My knees buckled, not imagined, heard. Clear as the dripping water, it came from deeper within. A wave of icy sweat cascaded down my spine. Adrenaline detonated through my veins. I took a step back, then, inexplicably, propelled by a force that wasn't courage, perhaps merely shock, I moved forward down the slope. Each step sent small stones skittering ahead. The floor pitched unevenly, slick with moisture. The flashlight revealed more petroglyphs. Those gaunt figures again, some adorned with what looked chillingly like headdresses fashioned from animal skulls. I tried not to look too closely. The glow intensified, though its sickly gray pallor remained. Unnatural, unsettling. It seemed to pool in a section where the cave ceiling vaulted higher. I emerged into a wider chamber. The roof arched 10 feet overhead, thick stalactites hanging like stone icicles, weeping crystalline drops that caught the light. Smaller tunnels branched off into utter darkness. Dominating the center was a large, flat-topped rock, disturbingly altar-like. More drawings adorned these walls, faded figures captured mid-writhe or dance around a central, barely discernible shape with large, vacant eyes. My chest felt constricted. Silence, save for the rhythmic drip, drip, drip. Then my name echoed again, seeming to come from all directions at once, a disorienting ventriloquism. I spun, the flashlight beam a frantic metronome against the stone. My hands shook violently. Again my name, drawn out, mocking, followed by soft, sibilant laughter that raised the hairs on my arms. It seemed to emanate from near the vaulted ceiling. I angled the beam upwards, nothing but rough rock, the shadowed undersides of stalactites. A blast of frigid air surged from one of the smaller tunnels, nearly unbalancing me, and in the retreating darkness at the tunnel's edge, something glinted, 2 minuscule points of reflected light. Eyes vanished the instant the beam touched them. Scraping sounds followed like claws dragged across stone. My stomach clenched violently. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, swallowed by the immensity of the space, amplified, then mocked by the echo. The crushing weight of my isolation pressed down. Deep underground, no signal, no help. The laughter returned, dissolving into a series of deep, ragged breaths, impossibly close. I stumbled backward, seeking the slope I'd descended. The cave felt darker behind me now, the walls subtly closing in. Panic flared, disorientation. Which way out? My beam frantically scanned jagged floor, towering walls, branching passages, then a familiar shape, the incline, a recognized cluster of drawings. I scrambled towards it, boots grating on loose rock, lungs burning with the frigid air. Something skittered across the floor behind me. I refused to look, heard it again. My name, the laughter, closer, so close I imagined hot breath on my neck, a phantom sensation instantly negated by the profound cold. Keep moving. I reached the narrower corridor, saw my own footprints like a lifeline in the dust. Following them, I reached the ledge, snatched up the camera bag without breaking stride. My throat was fused shut with dryness. The laughter pursued me. Then the voice uttered something else, guttural, unintelligible, syllables from a language dead or never born. I shouldered the bag and sprinted for the entrance, flashlight beam bouncing erratically, illuminating fractured glimpses of those haunting figures on the walls. Bursting from the cave mouth, I gasped the outside air, still cold but blessedly free of the subterranean oppression. The moon, lower now, painted the horizon a deep indigo. I clicked off the flashlight, letting my eyes adjust. The voice echoed from the cave's dark maw. My name, elongated, distorted, dissolving into a low growl that morphed back into laughter. Pure mockery. A full-body shiver racked me. No power on earth could make me re-enter that place. I fled down the narrow trail, stumbling, tripping on unseen rocks. My pulse roared in my ears. Every few yards I snapped my head around, expecting pursuit. Only silent boulders, the brooding shapes of mountains. My own ragged breathing dominated the soundscape. The earlier screams were long gone. Just the wind's whisper and my frantic heartbeat. Reaching the campsite felt like crossing an ocean. My tent stood forlorn, smaller, infinitely more vulnerable than before. No time wasted. I ripped out stakes, crammed gear haphazardly into my pack, collapsed the tent with fumbling, numb fingers. Every rustle, every crunch of dirt underfoot was a potential threat. Invisible eyes felt trained on me from the shadowed slopes. The back of my neck prickled, the memory of those twin lights burning behind my eyelids. Leave. Now. Descending the mountainside in darkness was risky, but preferable to remaining. Ankle injury versus whatever waited here. Gear packed, slung heavy on my shoulders, camera bag digging into my ribs. I started down the path leading away from the plateau. From somewhere behind, faint but distinct, the voice called out again. A cold amusement laced its tone, promising to follow me wherever I went in this wilderness. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them onward, tried to block the sound. Now and then, an echo of that chilling laughter drifted on the breeze. I fought the primal urge to look back. Focus, trail, footing, don't slip. Loose gravel skittered away under my boots. Down, down, until the landscape plunged into a steeper valley. I braced against tree trunks, sliding more than walking, twisting my ankle sharply. Pain lanced up my leg, but not enough to halt the adrenaline-fueled retreat. Distance, that was the only goal. Distance from the cave. Finally, flatter ground. The first hesitant strokes of dawn painted the eastern sky, a cold, gray light replacing the black. I paused, gasping, gulping water from my canteen. Muscles screamed in protest. My mouth tasted of fear, metallic and foul. I tried grounding myself, the cool water, the rough backpack straps biting into my shoulders. But the voice, my name, it reverberated in my skull. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing but trees and rock, yet the feeling of being watched remained, a tangible pressure. Onward. Even as the light grew, the forest remained unnervingly silent. Occasional rustles, small creatures likely made me jump. Tension locked my neck and shoulders, bracing for a cold grip that never came. The cave images flickered, drawings, the sickly glow, those eyes. Shake it off. Focus, trail. My feet dragged, but I willed them forward. Was that faint laughter on the wind, or just my frayed nerves? Refused to stop. Nearly 2 hours later, the trees began to thin. A dirt track appeared, the rugged access road where my car waited, miles below. My car, solitary, coated in pale dust. One last sweeping glance around before I unlocked it. The silence felt heavy, expectant. Behind me, the mountains rose, serene and impassive, in the strengthening morning light. Was that a flicker of movement? A dark shape amongst the trees at the edge of the clearing? I blinked. Gone. Imagination. Had to be. I threw my gear into the trunk, slammed it shut with unnecessary force, got in, locked the doors, started the engine, the familiar rumble, a small comfort. Hands still trembled on the wheel, cranked the heat, chasing away the chill that felt bone deep. My chest remained tight, breathing shallow. A reflexive glance in the rearview mirror. Empty back seat. I eased the car onto the rutted track, bumping slowly downward, dust billowing behind. The tension didn't dissipate. Even as I finally reached the paved highway miles later, the feeling lingered. A cold shadow clinging to my nerves. I focused on the road, the white lines, the mundane reality of asphalt. My ankle throbbed rhythmically. The cave, the voice, the eyes, burned into memory. It whispered my name, promising pursuit through the forest. I gripped the wheel tighter. No stopping now, not until miles, hundreds of miles, lay between me and those mountains. Signs of civilization, power lines, road signs became beacons. That's why I fled. Not a single usable photograph remained from the trip. Just a few bland daytime shots of rock formations. The campsite dismantled in blind panic. Let them call it folklore, exhaustion, hallucination. I know what I heard, what I saw, what I felt, and I wasn't waiting to discover the meaning behind those eyes, that laughter. All that mattered now was distance, enough distance to maybe, just maybe, sleep, without hearing that voice carving my name out of the darkness. The first time the ciphers materialized, sanity felt like a fraying thread. They simply were. shimmering into existence just above the crowns of heads, peculiar luminous glyphs suspended in the mundane air. I blinked furiously, scrubbed at my eyelids, willed them into non-existence. Yet they remained, faint incandescent signatures only I could perceive. It began on a Tuesday indistinguishable from any other. I was encased in the metallic shell of the morning commuter train, a sardine amongst strangers, when a soft cerulean glimmer coalesced above the woman pressed close beside me. Focusing, the light resolved into a distinct numeral, 43. Bewilderment washed over me. Had the pre-dawn coffee been unusually potent? Then my gaze snagged on another, 78, floating serenely above a businessman, oblivious behind his phone screen, and another 16, crowning a youth with defiant sapphire hair. A creeping realization dawned. Every soul jammed into that carriage bore a number. Every soul but mine. Disembarking at my station felt like stepping through a veil. My mind churned, adrift. The familiar two-block walk to the office transformed into a promenade through an ethereal data stream. Numerals bloomed everywhere, solitary digits sprawling three-figure sums. Their hues varied, the prevalent soft blue but also verdant greens, sunny yellows, even stark, unsettling crimsons. By the time I slumped into my office chair, the conviction I was undergoing a profound neurological event had solidified. Calling in sick, retreating home, perhaps arranging an urgent psychiatric consult. These thoughts clamored. Yet, surveying my colleagues, each haloed by their own spectral figure, an odd tranquility descended. If this was delusion, it possessed an unnerving coherence. My analyst instincts, submerged beneath the initial shock, surfaced. I would approach this phenomenon as data. A logbook materialized, notations of figures beside observations of the individuals they adorned. Initially, chaos reigned. No discernible correlation emerged. Not age, nor gender, nor any visible marker offered a key. But days bled into weeks, and a subtle dynamism revealed itself. The numbers weren't static, they ebbed and flowed, usually with glacial slowness, sometimes with startling velocity. I observed Mr. Sterling, my supervisor, his 89 ticking down to 88 across 7 days. Cassian, in the adjacent cubicle, saw his 32 leap inexplicably to 45 overnight. The cipher cracked roughly 2 weeks into this altered reality. Lunch with Maya, my closest confidant, provided the Rosetta Stone. Her number, a solid 62, shimmered as she recounted the bitter saga of her recent parting, as venom steeped her words about her ex. I watched it dip. 61. Then her narrative shifted, turning towards a newfound pottery class, the simple joy of shaping clay. The 61 brightened, climbing back to 62. Illumination struck, sharp and certain. These weren't random integers. They were quantifiers measuring some ephemeral quality, contentment perhaps, or fulfillment, rising with joy, receding with distress or stagnation, a gauge of existential well-being. The precise metric remained elusive, but the principle felt undeniable. Possessed of this fragile understanding, my perception of the world warped. Patterns emerged from the societal noise I'd previously ignored. Silas, the weathered man on the corner whose only currency was a kind word, consistently displayed a 72, a figure loftier than many of the impeccably dressed professionals hurrying past him, heads bowed to their devices. Jenna, the barista whose smile seemed permanently affixed, harbored a tremulous 23 betraying the forced cheer. An obsession took root, a compulsion to witness the flux, to decode the stimuli that governed ascent and decline. I saw numerals plummet in the wake of heartbreak, soar following unexpected triumphs. I watched a woman's 40 vault to 65 when a stranger simply helped retrieve her scattered groceries. Yet comprehension brought not clarity, but weight. A profound, unasked-for responsibility settled upon me. What was the protocol for such knowledge? Was intervention warranted when a number spiraled dangerously low? Did I bear an obligation to elevate these unseen scores? The universe provided an answer roughly a month after the cipher's debut. Walking home under the bruised twilight sky, my eyes fell upon a young man slumped on a park bench. His number pulsed a deep, visceral crimson, 3, the absolute nadir of my observations thus far. Something in his posture, a profound defeat etched into the curve of his spine, triggered an internal alarm. Before doubt could paralyze me, I approached. "Hey," I offered, striving for casualness. "Everything all right?" He startled, looking up with hollow eyes. Yeah, fine." Ignoring the unwritten rules of urban anonymity, I sat beside him. "You sure? You look like you might be carrying something heavy." Silence stretched, and I saw the crimson 3 flicker, threatening to dip lower. Then, abruptly, the dam broke. He spoke of a lost job, snowballing debts, the suffocating miasma of worthlessness. As his story tumbled out, raw and painful, I tracked his number, terrified it might extinguish entirely, though what that signified I dreaded to know. But then a quiet miracle unfolded as he spoke, as I simply listened, offering minimal interjections, threads of solace. His number began a slow, arduous climb, from 3 to 5, then 7, then 12. By the time his narrative found a calmer cadence, it rested at 15, still fragile, still shadowed, but the alarming crimson had yielded to a muted orange. "Thanks," he murmured, rising stiffly. "I don't know why, but I feel lighter, like maybe it's not completely hopeless." I watched him retreat, his 15 holding steady, a complex blend of relief and awe swirling within me. I had shifted something, a minuscule adjustment in the grand scheme, perhaps, but undeniably real. That nocturnal encounter became a quiet mandate. I began to act, not always with grand gestures, but often through subtle currents of kindness, paying for the coffee of the person queued behind me, offering a genuine compliment on a colleague's insight, volunteering hours at a downtown shelter. With each small act, I observed the subtle lift, the fractional rise in the numerals of strangers and acquaintances alike. It wasn't a panacea. There were instances where my efforts felt futile, where numbers continued their inexorable descent despite any intervention. I bore silent witness as my Aunt Isabel's number diminished steadily throughout her battle with cancer, finally settling at a peaceful 5 before she passed. I saw aspirations crumble, bonds sever, and the stark numerical toll these events exacted. And persistently the question echoed, why me? Why this solitary perception? A gift? A burden? Some cosmic clerical error? Answers remained elusive, replaced only by the deepening groove of responsibility. As months unspooled into a year, Another transformation became apparent, this one internal. I was changing. Empathy, once a distant concept, became a visceral sense. I started recognizing the precursors to a falling number, even without the visual cue. The slight tremor in a smile, the sag of weary shoulders, the flat undertone in a voice. Listening became an art form. My connections deepened. Paradoxically, this heightened emotional acuity benefited my analytical career, fostering better collaboration, shrewder insights into team dynamics. A novel sense of fulfillment bloomed within me. It happened nearly a year to the day after the ciphers first imposed themselves on my reality. Catching my reflection in the polished surface of a shop window, I stopped, breath-catching. There, shimmering faintly above my own hair, rendered in a steady, vibrant blue, was a number 89. In that instant, comprehension arrived, not as a sudden jolt, but as a quiet, profound recognition. The numbers weren't a symptom of madness, nor solely a burden. They were a lesson, crucible and classroom, teaching the profound weight of empathy, the intricate web of human impact, the irreplaceable value of connection. I still perceive the numerals. I still act when I can to nudge them upward, but now it's underpinned by the knowledge that we are all nodes in a vast, interconnected network of being. Each kindness resonates. Each moment of genuine presence sends ripples through the unseen currents connecting us. Whether the ciphers will ever fade, or if another soul shares this strange perception, remains unknown. But this I know with certainty. Even if they vanish tomorrow, the lesson is indelible. The numbers merely illuminated a fundamental truth. We constantly sculpt each other's internal landscapes, consciously or not. Every interaction, however fleeting, holds the potential to elevate or diminish that invisible measure of well-being. And perhaps that, ultimately, is the point. Not the solitary pursuit of one's own score, but the collective cultivation of solace and joy in the lives intertwined with ours. So, the next time you cross paths with another soul, remember, you possess the power to alter their unseen number. Make it count. A weekend sequestered deep within the woods, it always shimmered in my mind as the ultimate absolution. Freedom from the ceaseless hum, the weight of expectation. Just stillness, a balm for a mind frayed by the world's static. So when Liam proposed a cabin retreat, the idea resonated, a chord struck deep within. We unearthed a listing that promised paradise. Secluded, swathed in ancient trees bordering a placid lake. The perfect crucible, I thought, for quiet contemplation. What awaited, however, wasn't clarity, but an insidious dread, a burgeoning certainty that we were not the sole occupants of that sylvan expanse. The cabin itself possessed an antiquated allure, rough-hewn but welcoming. Sufficient for our quartet, myself, Liam, his partner Chloe, and her confidant, Maya. Stout timber beams traversed the ceiling above a grand hearth of river stone, while expansive windows framed the dense tapestry of the forest. We arrived as the afternoon waned, affording just enough daylight to settle in, to coax flames to life in the fireplace before twilight bled across the sky. That initial evening passed easily, cocooned by firelight, conversation and laughter echoing softly as obsidian shadows crept beyond the glass. The lack of signal, a deliberate choice, felt initially like emancipation. a severance from the digital tether. Yet upon waking the following dawn, that sense of liberation had curdled. A subtle dissonance at first, a nameless discomfort clinging to the quiet air. Perhaps just the groans of unfamiliar timbers settling, I reasoned. The cabin's size seemed amplified in the pre-dawn hush, the atmosphere within strangely inert, heavy. Dragging myself from bed, I sought the ritual of coffee. The interior remained stubbornly dim, despite the hour. A glance through the window offered not the expected sun-dappled leaves, but a dense, pallid miasma swirling between the tree trunks, an ancient fog clinging low, obscuring all but the nearest sentinels of the woods. It possessed a chilling permanence. Liam emerged minutes later, bleary-eyed, lamenting the digital silence. We exchanged murmured pleasantry before Chloe and Maya joined the quiet assembly. Over breakfast, we jested about the persistent fog, sketching plans for lakeside lounging once the veil lifted. But noon arrived and the fog held dominion, thickening, if anything. An unseasonal chill permeated the air, and despite our forced levity, the fog began to feel suffocating, a presence that devoured sound, rendering the forest unnervingly mute. "Shall we venture out?" Maya suggested, her gaze fixed on the opaque world beyond the window pane. "Explore a little. Surely it will burn off soon." A reluctance coiled within me, not from aversion to the walk itself, but from an instinctive warning the fog seemed to whisper, a feeling that the cabin was sanctuary and the woods outside lay in patient ambush. Yet Liam and Chloe were amenable, and solitude held less appeal than shared apprehension. Donning jackets, we stepped through the door, and the fog embraced us instantly, swallowing the cabin behind us. The woods were a labyrinth of close-pressed, towering trees, their branches knitting a dense canopy overhead. The trail we found was a mere ribbon snaking through the undergrowth, barely wide enough for two abreast. With each step, the cabin receded further into the mist until it vanished entirely. Time lost meaning in that muffled world. An hour might have passed, or perhaps mere minutes. The fog was an omnipresent damper, muting our footfalls on the sodden earth, hushing the rustle of unseen leaves, reducing our sporadic chatter to thin threads of sound against the backdrop of our own breathing. Then a creeping peculiarity asserted itself. The path seemed aimless, twisting perpetually without revealing any change in scenery. Each tree mirrored the last, tall, somber bark like ossified history. No distinguishing marks, no flicker of wildlife, only the endless fog-shrouded forest. Should we consider turning back? I ventured, my voice hushed, scanning the impassive faces of my companions. This trail, it doesn't feel right. How far have we even come? Liam offered a non-committal shrug. A bit further. We'll head back soon. But soon never arrived. We pressed onward, the knot of unease tightening in my gut. It felt as though the woods themselves were subtly rearranging, conspiring against our sense of direction. The path seemed to fold back upon itself, executing illogical loops. I searched desperately for a landmark, any variation in the monotonous landscape, but found none. Every gnarled trunk, every bend in the trail was an echo of the one before. "I think," Maya whispered, her voice fragile in the stillness, "we need to go back now." Consensus was immediate. Yet, when we turned, intending to retrace our steps, the path had ceased to exist. "What the hell?" Chloe breathed, rotating slowly, her eyes wide. Where did it go? A cold dread plunged through me. The trail we had followed so faithfully was simply gone, consumed by the mist. No scuffed earth, no broken twigs, no evidence of our passage remained. It was as if the forest had inhaled our tracks. We stood frozen, the unspoken admission of being lost, hanging heavy in the air. Fear flickered in every gaze, even Liam's, whose composure usually seemed unshakable. Okay, let's stay calm, he managed, though a tremor betrayed him. We'll find it, the cabin can't be far. But direction became meaningless. Each foray into the trees led only deeper into the homogeneous woods, the fog intensifying, pressing closer. The trees felt sentient now, their limbs reaching like skeletal fingers, the silence absolute, profound. And the conviction grew. We were not alone. Then it began, a sound leaching through the fog, faint at first, almost subliminal beneath the sound of our own ragged breaths, but undeniable. A soft, rhythmic percussion, tap, 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 slow, measured, emanating from somewhere deeper within the mist-shrouded woods. We halted, straining to hear. The sound persisted, swelling slightly, drawing nearer. Tap, tap, tap. What is that? Maya whispered, her voice thin with terror. No one replied. The tapping continued, its cadence unnervingly steady, seeming to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing strangely amongst the unseen trees. Move, I urged, my voice tight, strangled. Now! We broke into a stumbling run, abandoning any pretense of navigation, the sole imperative, distance from the sound. Yet the tapping pursued us, growing louder, faster, more frantic, matching our desperate pace. Then, as abruptly as it had commenced, silence fell once more. We stood heaving, breath pluming in the frigid air, ears straining against the oppressive quiet. Nothing. No tapping, no wind, only the suffocating embrace of the fog. And then, dimly perceived through the swirling gray, a structure materialized, a cabin, but not ours. Its roof sagged precariously, the timbers dark with rot and decay, bespeaking decades of abandonment. Windows gaped like empty sockets, the door lolled open on corroded hinges. It stood in sepulchral stillness, an unexpected, unwelcome apparition. How we had arrived there I couldn't fathom, but an absolute certainty crystallized within me. Entry was unthinkable. Without a word exchanged, we turned and fled. The fog swirling around us like a shroud, the trees seeming to writhe and distort as we crashed blindly through the undergrowth. I don't know how long we ran, propelled by primal fear, until we burst suddenly into a clearing, and there, shimmering faintly through the mist, stood our cabin. We never spoke of what we encountered in the fog. We gathered our belongings in frantic silence and departed that night, leaving the woods and their secrets behind. I have never returned. This sanctuary, my apartment, had never whispered unease into my ear before. It was merely a shell furnished with the mundane architecture of daily life, punctuated by an array of mirrors, my own additions, intended to coax light into corners and lend the illusion of expanse. I'd once cherished the way their surfaces fractured and duplicated the rooms, opening vistas of polished glass. Until one evening, a sliver of wrongness caught in the periphery of a reflection nearly sent my phone tumbling from my grasp. There, flanking my own image, swam another. a phantom twin, flickering like faulty neon before dissolving into absence. I remained rooted, the frantic drum of my pulse hammering against the fragile skin of my neck. Delusion, I pleaded inwardly, a trick of fatigue. Yet a vice tightened around my chest, and a constellation of gooseflesh prickled my arms. The certainty lingered, cold and sharp. The glass had held another gaze. Leo, that's the name I answer to. 32 years orbiting the sun, most recently within the confines of this compact one-bedroom perch, 10 stories above the hushed streetscape of a somnolent building. My existence follows predictable, quiet currents, mostly tethered to a screen, sculpting digital landscapes for unseen clients. The space itself is orderly save for the quiet accusation of unopened boxes huddled in a corner, monuments to delayed decisions. A utilitarian sofa squares off against the wall-mounted television, and everywhere, the mirrors. Strategically placed, they flank doorways, loom floor to ceiling in burnished wood frames, or hang like minimalist portals edged in stark metal. Once they were instruments of light, conjuring spaciousness from constraint. Now their omnipresent sheen feels less like reflection, more like scrutiny. It began, definitively, a few nights past. A simple pilgrimage to the kitchen for water, the apartment draped in the low wattage of evening. My own form drifted across the surface of the large cheval glass, stationed sentinel behind the sofa, and then it, the anomaly. Not quite a shadow, more like an overprint, a spectral overlay clinging to my silhouette. The contours mimicked mine, yet the eyes held a disturbing, oily luminescence, a darkness that seemed to drink the dim light. A paralysis seized me, cold dread spidering up my vertebrae. My gut clenched into a knot. The fine hairs at my nape lifted in primal alarm. Then, with the abruptness of a switched-off bulb, it winked out, leaving only Leo, reflected and alone. Trembling, I advanced, one hand finding the cool, solid wood of the frame. The frantic tattoo of my heart reverberated, a visceral pulse echoing in my ears. I waited, scanning the depths of the glass, probing every reflected angle. Nothing. Only my own familiar disarray stared back. Eyes shadowed with fatigue, hair askew, features etched with a raw worry. I slapped the switch, flooding the room with harsh overhead light. Still just me. A violent urge surged to wrench the offending object from the wall, to shatter its lying surface. But the sheer absurdity of it cooled the impulse. Shadows, surely. Exhaustion's phantoms. My eyes, strained and weary, conjuring specters from the gloom. I killed the light again, scrubbing at my face, attempting to knead away the tension, coiling deep in my muscles before retreating to the relative sanctuary of my bed. Dawn found me unrested, hollowed out. The memory of that aberrant reflection clung like a burr. Compelled, I subjected the mirror to a meticulous daylight inspection. The frame remained solid, the glass flawless, unblemished. Windows sealed tight against any vagrant breeze that might warp perception. Under the impartial morning sun, it was just a mirror, innocuous. I paced before it, shifting perspectives, seeking anomalies. Only my mundane self peered back. I pressed my palm flat against the surface, half expecting some textural betrayal. It offered only cool, impassive smoothness, an utterly standard piece of reflective glass. Work demanded attention. A deadline loomed, insistent. I tried to immerse myself in the precise geometry of digital images for a client, but my focus fractured. My hands betrayed a tremor over the keyboard. My gaze kept snagging on the small mirrored tile adjacent to my workstation, a decorative piece I'd never consciously registered before. Now it felt like a watching eye. I couldn't help the furtive glances, the peripheral vigilance bracing for something. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the cursor's blink. Nothing materialized. As I finally dispatched the completed project, a sliver of doubt returned. Perhaps it had been nothing more than a particularly vivid waking dream, a hallucination born of stress. Later, ensconced in the nightly ritual of dental hygiene, I stood before the mirror affixed to my closet door. I spat foam into the basin, rinsed. As my head lifted, it happened again. A flash, instantaneous, the figure hovering just beyond my left shoulder in the glass. Fainter this time, yet unmistakable, especially the eyes retaining that unsettling internal glimmer. My mouth turned to dust. The toothbrush clattered against the sink as my hand spasmed. I spun around, a choked gasp escaping me. Empty air, the vacant space of my bedroom. Slowly, deliberately, I pivoted back to the mirror, feeling the muscles from my nape to my lumbar spine seize and harden. My reflection was solitary once more, but my chest heaved, breath sawing in my throat. For a long minute, I stood frozen, breath held captive in my lungs. I flicked the light switch, on, off, on again, interrogating the angles, the play of light and shadow. Nothing stirred. The subsequent days blurred into a pattern of unnerving visitations. The figure began to bleed into the reflections of other mirrors throughout the apartment. It never lingered. A fleeting glimpse caught peripherally, or sometimes startlingly, holding the center of the frame for a bare second before vanishing. With each appearance, it seemed to gain substance, its edges sharpening, perhaps drawing nearer within its glassy dimension. I'd see it in the polished surface above the bathroom sink while washing my hands, or in the slender mirror beside the entryway as I reached for my keys. The true horror resided in its gaze. My own eyes stared back, yet warped, possessed by that dark, predatory flicker, reminiscent of nocturnal creatures caught in a beam of light, but imbued with an unnerving, focused hostility. A leaden weight would instantly plummet into my gut. My throat would constrict. Often a low, involuntary curse escaped my lips. Driven by a need to staunch the visual intrusions, I resorted to shrouding some of the mirrors, starting with the large one dominating the living area, draping it clumsily with an old bedsheet. The act felt profoundly foolish, yet the relief from constant apprehensive glancing was palpable. I was exhausted by the vigilance, by the dread of what might surface in the next polished plane. A friend, his voice a lifeline from the city's far reaches, called to check in. The confession hovered on my tongue, the frantic words, "There's something else in my mirrors, something that looks like me but isn't." But I swallowed them down. The sheer lunacy of it was a gag. Instead, I offered vague deflections. Swamped with work, feeling under the weather, he offered to visit, a gesture of casual kindness that I swiftly declined. How could I subject anyone else to this? How could I even begin to articulate the impossible? In the days that followed, I adopted a strategy of deliberate blindness. I navigated the apartment with averted eyes, hurrying past reflective surfaces, keeping lamps burning brightly in every room, even sleeping with a low wattage bulb casting frail shadows beside my bed. It made no difference. The presence asserted itself, finding new avenues. A flicker of movement glimpsed in the glass of the bedroom closet door, even when I wasn't directly facing it. A fleeting silhouette captured in the dark, reflective void of the switched-off television screen. Each instance triggered the familiar cascade, the frantic hammering in my ribs, the sudden clamminess of my skin. No matter how fiercely I rationalized, insisting it was neurological static, my body betrayed me. Limbs locked, muscles bunched, and that icy pool of dread flooded my stomach. One particularly oppressive night, I sought refuge on the sofa, attempting to lose myself in the meaningless flicker of some late-night program. The large mirror behind me remained shrouded, but across the room, flanking the television console, stood a tall, narrow panel of glass. Around the bleak hour of 2, a subtle shift in that distant reflection snagged my awareness. I fought it initially, anchoring my attention to the show's dialogue, but an insistent prickling crawled across my skin, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I thumbed the pause button, the sudden silence amplifying my heartbeat. Slowly, I turned my head. It was there, centered in the narrow mirror, staring directly out. My jawline, my nose, the familiar shape of my hair. But the eyes were abyssal pools, narrowed with unnerving intensity. My own reflection, logically, should have been angled away, mirroring my posture on the couch. This figure, however, faced me head-on. The remote slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. I could see the rapid rise and fall of my own chest reflected, feel the tremor in my hands. The duplicate held my gaze, unblinking, and then, impossibly, it moved. It stepped forward within the confines of the glass, gliding closer to the surface, even as I remained utterly still, pinned to the sofa cushions. A strangled gasp tore from my throat as I lurched upright, scrambling, sliding gracelessly onto the floor, hands flailing for purchase on the upholstery. When I dared to look back, the mirror showed only my own terrified form, sprawled on the rug, panting, eyes wide with shock, trails of cold sweat mapping paths down my temples. Sleep was unthinkable. I retreated to a corner of the living room, bathing the space in the glare of every available light, my gaze sweeping ceaselessly across walls and floorboards, struggling to regulate the ragged rhythm of my breath. Flight beckoned, a sterile hotel room, the solace of a friend's couch, but a peculiar, paralyzing shame anchored me here. The thought of confessing this escalating madness, of voicing the unbelievable, felt like a different kind of exposure, perhaps even more terrifying. It couldn't be real. Mirrors are passive observers. They return only what stands before them. They don't invent. They don't move. Morning light, sharp and unwelcome, eventually filtered through the windows, finding me slumped awkwardly on the sofa, where I must have finally succumbed to exhaustion. My back screamed in protest, neck rigid as I painfully unfolded myself. The sheet still veiled the primary mirror, but the others remained exposed, gleaming innocuously. I attempted to navigate the motions of a normal day, but the world felt tilted, precarious. Every passage by a reflective surface sent jolts of tension through me, locking my shoulders into a permanent, weary brace. My throat felt thick, requiring constant swallowing. I found myself performing irrational circuits of the apartment, testing locks on doors and windows, possessed by the illogical fear of a physical intruder, though knowing with chilling certainty that the threat wasn't outside. It resided solely within the glass. Later, seeking respite from the clammy grip of anxiety, I went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. Leaning over the basin, the rush of the faucet, a brief sonic shield, I cupped water, cleansing the sweat from my skin. As I straightened, lifting my gaze to the mirror above the sink, it materialized, instantly, positioned directly behind my left shoulder, so unnervingly close that its reflected proximity felt like a physical pressure. A glacial coldness infused my veins. Its eyes, those dark, watchful eyes, latched onto mine in the glass. Its mouth was a thin, severe line. For several heartbeats, I was frozen, my arms vibrating with suppressed tremors. Then, within the mirror's frame, the figure deliberately raised its arm. Simultaneously, a distinct, chilling brush whispered against my actual shoulder. A raw yelp escaped me. I whirled around, stumbling backward, my hip cracking against the porcelain edge of the sink. The small room was starkly empty. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. My heart hammered with enough force to induce dizziness. Fumbling, I silenced the running faucet and slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, sealing myself off from the vacant space where something unreal had just seemingly made contact. Enough. This passive endurance, this waiting for the next spectral intrusion, it had to end. A surge of desperate resolve propelled me. I retrieved a screwdriver from the small metal box near the entryway. Marching into the bedroom, I attacked the mirror on the closet door, a cheap fixture that had come with the lease. Metal screeched against resisting nails. A splinter of wood flew from the doorframe. Finally, with a wrenching groan, it came free. I hefted the panel, its weight surprisingly substantial, carried it into the living room and leaned it face down against the wall. My hands shook so violently I had to sink onto the sofa edge. My gaze fell upon the shrouded bulk of the main mirror. They all had to go. A cold certainty whispered that it might be futile. The entity had already proven its ability to manifest in surfaces I couldn't dismantle. The dark screen of the television, the night-blackened windows. Yet the imperative to act was overwhelming. I began methodically unhooking the smaller mirrors, stacking them carefully in the hallway, a growing pyre of reflected light. My muscles burned with tension. My mouth felt parched. A glance at the clock, 7 p.m. Darkness was already seeping through the windows. I moved through the apartment, switching on every single light, banishing shadows with an almost frantic intensity. By 9, I was pacing the narrow confines of the hallway, trapped between the urge to violently destroy the stacked glass and the more practical notion of banishing them to the building's storage unit. It was then that my eye caught it. A ripple of movement beneath the sheet draping the large living room mirror, as if something underneath had stirred, brushing against the fabric from within. Air lodged in my throat. I froze mid-stride. I stared, praying it was a trick of the light, a settling of the cloth. But it happened again, a definite, localized undulation, like the pressure of a hand against the sheet's underside. Heat flared across my face, the familiar chemical burn of adrenaline. Screwdriver gripped tight, its metallic coldness a stark contrast to my sweating palm. I took a hesitant step towards the shrouded mirror. Closer now, I could discern a faint convex bulge straining against the fabric, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. With a single convulsive tug, I ripped the sheet away. For a fraction of a second, the mirror presented only emptiness. Then my own reflection leaped into view, pale, pupils dilated, screwdriver held like a weapon. And then, materializing directly behind my reflected image, impossibly close, virtually shoulder to shoulder, stood the figure, closer than it had ever been. My gaze locked with its distorted twin in the glass. Its lips were slightly parted, as if on the verge of utterance, though no sound disturbed the charged silence. A strange tingling traversed my scalp. I hissed a breath out through gritted teeth. A primal scream echoed in my skull. Act! I raised the screwdriver high, fueled by sheer terror, and brought it down against the glass with all my strength. The impact resounded, a sickeningly loud crack that filled the apartment. Spiderweb fissures instantly radiated from the point of contact. Slivers of silvered glass rained onto the floor. My reflection fractured into a dozen disjointed Leos, the figure behind me warping and breaking apart with it. I staggered back, nearly losing my footing, breath tearing from my lungs. I stood there, trembling, staring at the ruined surface. My pulse raged, a chaotic rhythm against the sudden, ringing silence. My eyes darted frantically to the other mirrors, the stacked panels in the hall, half expecting the entity to reconstitute itself elsewhere. But for long, breathless minutes, nothing stirred. The only sound was the ragged cadence of my own breathing. Eventually, the tremors subsided enough for me to fetch a broom. Mechanically, I swept the glittering debris into a dustpan, my gaze flicking nervously toward the remaining mirrors, scrutinizing my reflection within them. No phantom companion appeared. Once the floor was clear, I carefully leaned the fractured mirror against the wall, its shattered face turned inward. Exhaustion settled deep in my bones, yet adrenaline still sang beneath my skin, leaving me feeling stretched taut, as if I'd run for miles. Hours have passed since the shattering. I remain here, adrift in the living room, an unwilling curator surrounded by stacked glass and the memory of violence. A persistent tremor lives in my hands. My temples pulse in time with my frantic heart. Did I banish it, or does it merely bide its time, waiting to coalesce in some other polished surface? Sometimes I still feel it, a phantom pressure between my shoulder blades, the ghost of a gaze. Nerves, perhaps, or perhaps not. Every reflective plane in this apartment now feels hostile, untrustworthy. The urge to flee is a physical ache, yet I feel too frayed, too volatile to step outside. Should I snatch my coat, stuff essentials into a bag, and simply disappear into the night? Or undertake a more radical exorcism? Haul every single mirror out, dispose of them, pray that the tether is broken. For now, I simply exist in this brightly lit cage, deliberately avoiding prolonged glances into any glass. I am afraid that the next time I look, the next time that other face appears beside mine, I might truly lose the ability to distinguish the reflection from the reality, the self from the specter. The sand held a secret, etched where the tide couldn't quite reach, and in that instant, the shimmering illusion of our perfect family escape fractured into dread. They were not our marks, these impressions in the damp grains, nor did they belong to the resort's phantoms of service. No, these were alien, deliberate, describing a predatory circuit around our beachfront bungalow, hinting at a purpose that turned the sea breeze cold against my skin. This was meant to be the balm, the necessary severance from the city's relentless hum. My wife, Clara, our children, Maya, a perceptive 10, and Leo, 8 years of boundless energy, and I had counted down the months. A week sequestered in coastal exclusivity, far from the tyranny of schedules. Brochures had whispered promises, sands like powdered sugar, waters of impossible clarity, and a cocoon of privacy attainable only within such rarefied confines. Upon arrival, paradise unfurled. Our villa presided over the shore, its glass facade drinking in the vast, unbroken ocean panorama. The children, predictably, were ecstatic bolts of energy, instantly claiming the water's edge. Clara and I shared a glance, a silent exchange weighted with hope. Perhaps this truly was the idol we'd chased in dreams. 2 days dissolved in sun-drenched bliss. We swam, erected ephemeral sand kingdoms, ambled along the shoreline. The resort staff materialized like genies when summoned, dissolving just as efficiently. It was during such a walk as the second day bled into a spectacular sunset painting, long skeletal shadows across the beach, that the first discordant note sounded. Returning towards the villa, I registered them. Footprints starkly unfamiliar. They emerged from the dense emerald tangle bordering the sands, described a deliberate arc around our temporary home, and retreated whence they came. See anyone near the bungalow earlier? I ventured, aiming for casualness, a poor shield for the disquiet stirring within. Clara, lost in Leo's triumphant recounting of a discovered conch shell, shook her head absently. I attempted to dismiss the observation, yet an unease, cold and heavy, had anchored itself deep in my gut. Sleep became an elusive quarry that night. Every whisper of the waves, each rustle of palm leaves skittering in the breeze, resonated with amplified imagined menace. Multiple times I rose, a sentinel checking on slumbering children, peering through the glass walls into the indifferent darkness, finding nothing amiss. Dawn broke, painting the sky in fragile pastels. I slipped outside early, scanning the beach. The tide, or perhaps the resort's meticulous groundskeepers, had erased the unsettling evidence. Relief warred with suspicion. I might have convinced myself it was a phantom of my fatigue, had a metallic glint near our veranda not snagged my gaze. Stooping, I retrieved a small burnished object, a cufflink, its design bespoke, certainly not mine. I secreted it away in my pocket, the knot of anxiety tightening. Turning back towards the villa, a peripheral flicker arrested me. A figure half swallowed by the luxuriant vegetation rimming the beach observed our dwelling. The moment my gaze met theirs, the shape melted back into the green density. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I retreated indoors, the click of the lock echoing too loudly in the sudden silence. Should I voice my fears to Clara, shatter the fragile peace over phantoms and a lost accessory? My instinct screamed louder than my reason. Before the dilemma could resolve, a polite rapping sounded at the door. One of the staff, smile impeccably fixed. "Good morning, sir," he offered, the pleasantry feeling hollow. "Trust you're enjoying your stay. A minor technical matter, I'm afraid." Our communication grid is experiencing some instability. Mobile signals and internet access may be sporadic for the next day or so. The front desk remains available via the internal line naturally. I murmured thanks, suspicion blooming into certainty. The moment the door closed, I checked my mobile. Barren, no signal. The villa's landline yielded only a dead tone. Clara emerged from the bedroom, stretching languidly. "Who was that, my love?" A fractional pause, then the dam broke. I recounted everything. The alien prince, the expensive cufflink, the fleeting watcher in the trees, the conveniently crippled communications. Her face lost its color as I spoke, becoming a mask of dawning comprehension. "What do we do, Elias?" she whispered, her eyes darting towards the children's room. "We leave," I stated, the decision solidifying into resolve. "Now, pack essentials, quietly. We'll tell the children it's a surprise adventure." As Clara moved to rouse Maya and Leo, I risked another glance outside. My breath hitched. 3 men now occupied the beach, their presence blatant, undisguised. Casually attired, yes, like any other guests, but their posture, the unwavering focus of their collective gaze upon our villa, it broadcasted something far removed from leisurely tourism. "Clara," I urged softly, urgency threading my voice. "Faster." We flung clothes and necessities into bags with frantic inefficiency, struggling to project an air of playful spontaneity for the children. Maya, ever watchful, sensed the dissonance. "Papa, why are those men staring at our house?" she asked, her small face pressed against the glass. "Just admiring the architecture blossom," I managed, the lie thin and brittle. "Right, new game. Let's see who can be the quietest mouse leaving the house. Total silence wins." Leo, ever eager for competition, nodded with solemn intensity. Maya's expression remained skeptical, but she complied. We slipped through the villa's rear exit, crouching low, moving with agonizing slowness, into the embrace of the thick vegetation. It offered concealment, but exacted a price in speed. Every cracked twig sounding like a rifle report in the tense air. We were perhaps halfway to the resort's central complex when shouts erupted behind us. Our absence discovered. "Run!" The command tore from my throat, shattering the pretense of stealth. Clara hoisted Leo. I seized Maya's hand, and we crashed through the undergrowth, the sounds of pursuit. Heavier footfalls, urgent calls, closing the distance. We burst from the green labyrinth onto the main paved pathway, startling a couple engaged in a placid morning stroll. "Help!" Clara cried out, her voice ragged. "Please call security, help us!" They gaped, bewildered as we sprinted past, the thudding of our pursuers' feet terrifyingly close. Rounding a curve, the main building materialized ahead. A taxi idled near the entrance, engine running. "Wait!" I yelled, waving desperately. Improbably, the driver registered our frantic approach and paused. We tumbled into the vehicle, lungs burning. "Go!" I shouted. "Drive, now!" The driver, face etched with alarm, stomped on the accelerator just as the figures pursuing us broke onto the path. In the rearview mirror, a chilling tableau, one man raising an arm, something metallic catching the sun. "Down!" I roared, shoving the children towards the floor mats. A violent crack and the rear window starred, raining fractured glass as we careened through the resort gates. The driver was shouting now, unintelligible syllables laced with pure panic, wrestling the car onto the main coastal road, the engine screaming protest. Minutes stretched into an eternity of high-speed flight, silence reigning in the car, thick with terror. Only as the roadside began to show signs of denser habitation did I dare to exhale. "Think we lost them," I breathed, the words trembling. Clara wept silently, her arms a vice around Maya and Leo. Maya looked stunned into stillness, while Leo, bless his innocent heart, seemed to consider the entire terrifying episode part of our adventure game. "Mister," the driver finally said, his eyes finding mine in the mirror, wide with residual fear. "What was that? Who?" "I don't know," I answered, the honesty stark. "But I think we just ran from something truly terrible." Our destination became the nearest police station. Hours bled away in fragmented explanations, met initially with professional skepticism that slowly yielded to the undeniable evidence of bullet-fractured glass and our raw, palpable distress. The full, chilling truth emerged later, pieced together by international agencies. The idyllic resort served as a facade, a gilded cage for a sophisticated syndicate specializing in the abduction of affluent tourists for ransom, or fates too grim to contemplate. We had stumbled perilously close to the edge of an abyss. The knowledge of that proximity became a haunting presence. For months, nightmares plagued the children. Clara and I flinched at sudden noises, shadows holding potential threats. Healing was a slow, arduous climb, aided by therapy and time, teaching us to navigate the world again without the constant specter of fear looking over our shoulders. We did heal, incrementally, imperfectly. Now, advertisements showcasing exotic shores and exclusive retreats trigger an involuntary chill. That sun-drenched escape taught a brutal lesson. Paradise can exact a devastating price, and beneath the most picturesque surfaces, darkness can fester. We still travel, determined to show our children the world's wonders, but our eyes are wide open now, forever scanning the periphery, forever remembering that some seemingly perfect beaches hold footprints best left undisturbed, lest they lead you into the heart of a nightmare disguised as a dream. A tremor traced Elias's spine the moment his boots met the pavement of that forsaken avenue. Darkness pooled deep between the buildings, disturbed only by the anemic pulse of a few surviving street lamps, their light flickering like dying heartbeats. Exhaustion settled in his bones, a leaden weight after the day's long labor. Home was a siren call he yearned to answer. Then he saw it, a two-story edifice squatting on the corner, its windows gaping like empty eye sockets. From within drifted the skeletal melody of some forgotten tune, thin and consumed by static. No lights showed, yet an unseen current tugged him closer. Perhaps, he reasoned with weary logic, someone inside could chart a swifter path through this urban maze. That logic dissolved the instant his foot touched the porch's yielding timber. The steps ascending to the shadowed doorway were a roadmap of decay, fissures snaking across warped boards. Testing the first riser, his right foot plunged through rotted wood. sending up a choking cloud of ancient dust. He coughed, snatching at the handrail. It wobbled precariously under his grip. His own pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against his temples. The music persisted, its melody now dragging, distorted, like a vinyl record groaning on a failing turntable. Through the open windows, only impenetrable blackness stared back. He reached for the door, hanging slightly off its frame, its paint flaking away like sunburnt skin, littering the porch with brittle confetti. A gentle push, and the hinges screamed a high, desiccated protest, a sound of long-neglected metal. He stepped across the threshold, and immediately a chill exhalation of air swept past him from the interior. With a violent concussion that jolted his heart, the door slammed shut behind him. He whirled, hand fumbling for the handle, yanking with sudden panic. It held fast, unyielding. Elias stood frozen in the Stygian gloom of the entrance hall. Beneath his weight, the floorboards uttered a low groan before perceptibly sinking. He leaped back as a section splintered violently, his leg plunging halfway into the void before he scrambled free, breath tearing at his lungs. The air hung thick and stagnant, saturated with the cloying perfume of decay and damp, rotting wood. Inside, the melancholy tune gained presence, seeming to emanate not from a single source, but to echo from the very walls, a ubiquitous, sorrowful resonance. Drawing slow, deliberate breaths, Elias fought for composure. He moved with excruciating care, testing each plank before trusting it with his weight, hugging the relative solidity of the wall. A tremor agitated his hands. A bead of sweat traced a cold path down his temple, his shirt clinging damply to his back. Escape became his sole focus, a rear exit, a window he could force. But the windows flanking the entrance, seen open from the street, were now revealed to be sealed from within by rough-hewn boards. Deeper into the house he crept, guided by slivers of moonlight piercing the gloom through cracks in the plaster. His footsteps produced an unsettling echo disproportionate to the space, as if the dimensions themselves were fluid. Phantom whispers seemed to lick at the edge of his hearing. Each swift turn revealed only the corridor receding into shadow. The thought of being immured here until dawn sent a fresh wave of cold through him. The music intensified as he advanced, a grating lament of violin strings, interwoven with a low, resonant hum reminiscent of a derelict church organ. Its melody cycled relentlessly, a short, maddening loop devoid of variation, etching itself onto his already frayed nerves. He felt his fists clench and unclench involuntarily, his body taut with primal alertness. Ahead, a staircase materialized from the shadows. Its banister was fractured, missing sections, each step appearing canted and unsafe. He paused at its foot, listening intently. Above the music, another sound surfaced, voices, not conversation, but a rhythmic liturgical chanting, the words alien and indecipherable, layered as if murmured by a hidden congregation. A prickling sensation crawled over his scalp. His breathing quickened into shallow rasps. Compelled by an instinct that defied reason, convinced the music's origin lay above, Elias placed a foot on the bottom step. It groaned in loud protest. He ascended, clinging to the rough, splintered wood of the remaining banister. Certain steps creaked more ominously than others, sending jarring vibrations through the soles of his shoes. His legs felt unsteady, his mouth arid, the taste of dust clinging to his tongue. Reaching the upper landing, he found himself in a long corridor flanked by closed doors. At the far end, a solitary window admitted a sliver of spectral moonlight. The chanting was clearer now, emanating from somewhere ahead, perhaps behind one of the doors, perhaps further down the passage. The music persisted, its familiar loop now strangely distorted, dissonant. His pulse throbbed in his ears. He approached the first door on his right, his hand resting momentarily on the knob. It felt unnaturally cold. Turning it slowly, he nudged the door inward with his foot. The hinges emitted a faint squeal. For an instant, the music swelled, then receded. The room beyond was steeped in darkness, revealed by the beam of the flashlight he'd retrieved from his pack to be sparsely furnished with broken remnants. Dust-shrouded chairs, a small table listing on 3 legs. Cobwebs hung in heavy festoons from the ceiling. From the hallway behind him came the distinct creak of a floorboard settling under weight. Elias spun, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The corridor stretched empty behind him, his heart hammered against his ribs. Leaving the room, he continued down the hall. The second door resisted, locked fast. The third yielded, opening into a smaller chamber thick with the smell of damp plaster. A single window on the far wall was cracked open perhaps an inch. Hope surged, an escape. He strained against the frame, attempting to force it wider, putting his full weight into the effort. It refused to budge more than a fraction. The chanting abruptly intensified, seeming to rise from just outside the door, raising the hairs on his neck. Defeated, he abandoned the window and retreated to the corridor. As he neared the end, a bizarre optical illusion took hold. The corridor seemed to lengthen before him. One moment the final door appeared mere feet away. The next, it receded, impossibly distant. He pressed onward, yet the door remained elusive, retreating with each step he took. His flashlight beam flickered erratically. He tapped the casing anxiously. A sickening lurch went through his stomach as the very floor beneath him seemed to shudder, the house groaning as if shifting on its foundations. The floorboards cracked more sharply with each footfall, his knees turning to water, the fear of plunging through the decaying structure returning with force. At long last, he stood before the final door on the left. Pressing his ear against the wood, he listened. The music seemed fainter here, yet the voices were sharp, distinct, reciting what sounded like a meaningless string of syllables. His face felt flushed, sweat stinging his eyes. He pushed the door open. It revealed a large, vacant room. Wide, dust-laden planks formed the floor, littered with debris. Tall windows lined the opposite wall, all inexplicably thrown open, allowing pale moonlight to flood the space and illuminate the swirling motes of dust. He stepped inside, sweeping his flashlight beam across the emptiness. His footsteps echoed unnervingly. Then came the truly bizarre effect. When he stopped walking, the echo of his steps persisted, multiplied, as if unseen companions matched his pace, their footfalls staggering slightly behind his own before fading into the quiet. A band of ice seemed to tighten around his chest. He spun around, flashlight stabbing the air behind him. The room was utterly, undeniably empty, yet the phantom echoes still whispered into silence. Suddenly, the chanting swelled to a roar, the sound seeming to ricochet off the bare walls before abruptly ceasing. An unnerving silence descended upon the house. Elias stood rigid, his breathing ragged, desperately trying to regain control. His flashlight beam snagged on something at the far end of the room, a door partially obscured by a tattered length of fabric crudely nailed to the wall like a makeshift curtain. As if on cue, the music resumed, but this time the notes seemed to rise from beneath the floorboards, a vibration he could feel through the soles of his shoes. He traversed the room, picking his way over shattered planks and drifts of peeling wallpaper. The door behind the ragged curtain was unlocked. He nudged it open with his shoulder. It revealed another hallway, narrower than the one upstairs, the air heavy with dampness and a pervasive musty odor, the signature scent of mold. The chanting returned, pulsing in and out of focus, now distant, now seemingly beside him. His muscles remained coiled with tension. He had to consciously command himself to breathe. He moved down this new corridor, his light tracing the cracked plaster walls, revealing the lath skeleton beneath in places. He passed a door on his right, tested the knob, stuck. A hard yank, and it flew open, revealing a small storage space lined with shelves, mostly bare. A few glass jars contained desiccated, unidentifiable contents. Dried herbs, perhaps, or leaves. He didn't linger. The smell within was stronger, acrid, nearly making him gag. Closing the door, he pressed on. The hallway terminated at a stairwell descending into deeper darkness. These steps appeared more solid than those near the front entrance, but visibility ended just a few feet down. The music was undeniably emanating from below now, the chanting louder, more insistent. The urge to turn back warred with the knowledge of the jammed front door. Perhaps salvation, a back exit, lay in the depths. As he descended, the temperature plummeted. His skin prickled with goose flesh. A shiver racked his frame. His own breath echoed hollowly in the enclosed space. Gripping the damp, cold railing, he kept his flashlight beam fixed downward. The stairs delivered him to a level he hadn't perceived from outside, some form of basement. The floor here was rough stone, his footsteps scraping noisily, sending echoes skittering along the corridor. The walls were bare concrete, slick with moisture, patches colonized by dark moss. Somewhere nearby, water dripped with relentless, soft precision. The chanting surged again, seemingly originating just around the upcoming bend. His stomach clenched, shoulders aching with accumulated tension. Logic screamed at him to halt, yet some deeper compulsion drew him onward. The thought of remaining motionless in that suffocating passage, listening to those disembodied voices, felt infinitely worse than confronting whatever lay ahead. Rounding the corner, Elias found himself in a long, rectangular chamber. It might once have served as a storage cellar or workshop. Crude wooden tables lined the walls, their surfaces marred by indeterminate stains. Shelves at the far end stood mostly vacant, save for a few scraps of brittle paper. And there, in the room's center, stood the source, an antique gramophone, complete with a large brass horn. A dusty, scratched record spun slowly on its turntable, emitting the same warped, melancholic tune that had haunted the house. The horn faced a corner, causing the sound to rebound in strange, disorienting ways. His flashlight beam glinted off the tarnished metal. The chanting saturated the air, seemingly sourceless, enveloping him. The record continued its slow, inexorable rotation, repeating the melody that had become the soundtrack to his terror. His chest felt constricted. He swallowed against a dry throat. He approached the gramophone, kneeling beside it. The record was visibly scarred, coated in grime. He reached out, intending to stop its mournful rotation. The instant his fingers brushed the tone arm, the chanting voices detonated. It was no longer a murmur, but a deafening, multi-layered scream assaulting his eardrums. He staggered backward, nearly dropping his flashlight, his ears ringing violently. In the periphery of his vision, shadows along the walls seemed to writhe and sway. He swept the flashlight beam frantically across the room, searching for any human presence. Nothing. Only empty space and the overwhelming sonic assault. The chanting was relentless, a physical force battering his senses, making thought impossible. He clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He forced air into his lungs. After a few agonizing seconds, the cacophony subsided, receding once more into a soft, indistinct murmuring. He opened his eyes, gaze fixed on the gramophone. The record still turned, the needle caught in the same damaged groove. Steeling himself, Elias reached out again, carefully lifted the tone arm and gently placed it on its rest. The music died. Abruptly, the room fell silent, save for the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He remained frozen, holding his breath, waiting. His flashlight flickered again threateningly, but the beam held. The urge to flee was overwhelming. Turning from the now silent gramophone, his eyes scanned desperately for an exit. He spotted it, a single door on the opposite side of the chamber. He hurried towards it, flashlight beam dancing ahead, illuminating obstacles. A length of rusted chain coiled on the floor, a section where the stone paving had collapsed inward. Skirting the debris, he grasped the door's handle. It opened into a narrow passage. The walls were rough-hewn rock, and a current of cold, fresh air blew from ahead. He slipped through, pulling the door shut behind him. The chanting felt muted now, muffled as if by thick walls. The passage angled forward, and ahead he saw it, a faint luminescence. Moonlight, an opening to the outside. Relief surged through him, loosening the knot in his chest. He broke into a near run, adrenaline lending speed to his exhausted limbs. The passage terminated in a small fractured doorway, its frame splintered. He had to crouch low to pass through. He emerged into the cool night, finding himself behind the house in a neglected yard choked with weeds, bordered by a collapsing fence. The night air, clean and crisp, rushed into his lungs. He inhaled deeply. Above, the sky was clear, the moon a cold pearl, scattered stars sharp against the blackness. His body trembled with reaction, weak but profoundly relieved to be free. He stumbled away from the looming structure, navigating the treacherous ground littered with tall grass and rotting planks. Reaching the fence, he found a gap and squeezed through. He was back on the deserted street further down now, near another intersection. Behind him, the house stood silent and forbidding. It seemed darker than before, and he noted with a jolt that the windows, the ones he'd first seen gaping open, were now tightly shut. He stood on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, heart still racing, his shirt plastered to his skin with cold sweat. Fragments of the ordeal flashed through his mind. The chanting, the collapsing floor, the spectral echoes. His throat felt raw. He needed water, needed distance. The house remained inert, no music, no voices disturbing the night. He backed away slowly, eyes fixed on the darkened windows. Nothing stirred, No lights flickered to life. Finally, he turned and walked, quickly at first, then forcing himself into a steadier pace, resisting the urge to look back. His legs felt like rubber beneath him, his shoes scuffing the pavement. Several blocks later, the streetlights burned brighter, and the distant neon glow of a gas station sign promised refuge. He didn't pause until he stood under its fluorescent glare. The clerk glanced up, his expression mildly curious at Elias's disheveled, sweat-soaked appearance. Elias grabbed a bottle of water, paid, and retreated back outside without a word. Leaning against the cool brick wall, he drank deeply, the water soothing his parched throat. His fingers still trembled. He noticed angry red splinters embedded in his palm from the decaying banister. Dust and grime coated his clothes. He forced himself to regulate his breathing, focusing on the mundane sounds of the station, the hum of the pumps, a car idling, the distant drone of traffic on a main road. No insidious music, no disembodied chanting, just the cool night air and the reassuring normality of the world outside that house. He knew it was real. The voices, the floor giving way, the spinning record, they were not imagined. He couldn't conjure an explanation for any of it. The stretching corridor, the slamming door, the sealed windows. But the feeling lingered, potent and chilling. The house had been aware, and it had tried to keep him. He has never returned. He sometimes passes through that part of the city, but he avoids that specific street with religious fervor. Driving by, he scans the familiar corner, but the house seems absent, perhaps hidden by the darkness, perhaps by his own unwillingness to truly see it. A profound unease settles over him whenever he nears the area, a persistent sensation of being watched. The memory of those phantom footsteps echoing his own. The moment the voices crescendoed into a mind-shattering roar. These refuse to fade. He rarely speaks of it. The tale sounds too much like delusion, yet the certainty remains etched into his mind. He will never again set foot near that place. Avoiding it is his only recourse. If the house still stands, it stands without him. A small, cold comfort. Shortcuts through deserted streets hold no appeal now. No matter the depth of his weariness, he will always choose the long way home. The ghost hum of dormant engines was the sole counterpoint to the profound quiet swallowing the night shift. 6 months I'd haunted this husk of industry, this sprawling relic on the city's frayed edge, a cathedral of rust and shattered glass. Thought I'd cataloged all its nocturnal quirks. Then came that October night, a pivot point where I stumbled into a hidden malignancy that fractured my reality and staked my life as collateral. Leo, that's me. Night watchman, not the stuff of dreams, but it kept the lights on. The plant itself sprawled, a metal beast slowly surrendering to entropy. Most nights, my companions were the spectral echoes of machinery. Elias the cleaner shuffling somewhere in the gloom, and the occasional feral cat seeking refuge from the urban chill. This particular shift began under an ordinary shroud. Punched the clock at 10, hefted the weighty torch, commenced the familiar patrol. Navigating the labyrinth of skeletal assembly lines and echoing corridors consumed a solid hour. Halfway through, threading past Sector Gamma, I caught it, whispers snagging the silence. They emanated from an old supply nexus, a sector bolted shut for as long as anyone remembered. Trespassers weren't unheard of, bored kids chasing phantom thrills. But this wasn't adolescent bravado. The cadence was low, urgent, conspiratorial. Curiosity, that treacherous impulse, tugged me forward. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Closer, the words solidified. Delivery docks tonight. Everything needs to be seamless. What about eyes? That new security guy, he's nosier than the last fossil. A glacial stillness seized me. They meant me. Forget him. He plants his feet wrong. We root him out. The detached finality of the voice scraped ice down my vertebrae. Logic screamed retreat, dial the authorities, anything but linger. Yet paralysis held me fast. A need to comprehend this unfolding wrongness eclipsed self-preservation. Risking exposure, I angled my head around the corroded doorframe. The vista within jolted me. The expected detritus, cobwebbed machinery, forgotten crates had vanished. In its stead, banks of humming electronics, monitors flickering with segmented views of the entire factory, my own patrol routes likely among them, and there, clustered beneath the stark glare of a utility lamp, stood 5 figures, familiar faces, co-workers, including Silas, my own shift supervisor. They were hunched over a central console, examining something obscured, but the air vibrated with coiled tension. This was no petty pilfering. It was orchestrated, significant. A scuff of my boot sole on gritty concrete must have betrayed me. Silas's head snapped up, his gaze locking onto mine across the threshold. Time warped, stretching thin. Leo. His voice was a disquieting blend of surprise and something infinitely colder. What brings you off-piste? I fumbled some explanation. Phantom noises, routine check. But their expressions remained unconvinced. Masks of disbelief hardening into something predatory. The room's energy shifted, crackling with imminent danger. How much did you clock? Another man growled, shifting his weight, a step taken in my direction. Instinctively, I recoiled, palms raised in a placating gesture. 0, nothing, just got here, honest. Silas exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his thinning hair. Leo, 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 should have stuck to the script, pal. And then I saw it, nestled in his grip, previously shielded by the console's bulk. The dull gleam of a handgun. My heart vaulted, lodging itself somewhere behind my tonsils. Look, I managed, wrestling my voice toward steadiness. Whatever this is, I want no part. Just let me walk. We can erase this whole moment. A hollow chuckle escaped Silas, devoid of any warmth. Not quite that easy, Leo. We've cultivated something delicate here. Can't have stray variables. I didn't require further elaboration. I pivoted and bolted, their enraged shouts erupting behind me like bursts of flak. My advantage was intimacy with the factory's decaying anatomy. I exploited every shortcut, every shadow-drenched passage etched into my memory. Footsteps echoed, diverging, a net tightening around me. My mind churned, assembling the fragments, the high-tech surveillance, the talk of shipments, smuggling. They were leveraging this industrial corpse as a conduit. A cramped maintenance closet offered temporary sanctuary. I slid inside, gasping for air, mind racing. Escape, police, but my phone languished in my locker miles away, and the main egress lay across a treacherous expanse of hostile territory. Thus began hours of nerve-shredding hide-and-seek, moving in calculated bursts during perceived lulls, only to freeze at the sound of approaching feet, melting back into the oppressive darkness. The factory, once a predictable grid, morphed into a predatory maze. Dawn began to bleed through the grime-caked upper windows, painting the gloom with weak gray light. An opportunity. Their search seemed concentrated on the upper levels, leaving the ground floor, the main entrance, relatively exposed. I committed. Exploding from cover, I ran, legs pumping with a desperation I had never known. I burst through the heavy main doors, the cool pre-dawn air, a shock against my sweat-slicked face. Relief was a fleeting phantom. As I sprinted across the cracked asphalt towards the employee lot, a shout tore through the quiet. "There! He's there!" The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air. A hornet zipped past my ear. I weaved erratically, a desperate dance against an unseen trajectory, lungs scorching, reaching my battered sedan, keys trembling in my grasp. The lock clicked open just as a white-hot agony blossomed in my left shoulder. Hit. Adrenaline surged, eclipsing the pain. I hurled myself inside, twisted the ignition, engine roaring to life. The tires screamed as I fishtailed out of the lot. A glance in the rearview mirror framed Silas and his cohort, spilling from the factory entrance, momentarily frozen, but I was already careening onto the main thoroughfare. Straight to the precinct, shoulder-leaking crimson onto the worn upholstery. The hours that followed dissolved into a disorienting montage. Urgent questions, antiseptic smells, the stark, chilling clarity of my near demise. The subsequent police raid on the factory yielded predictable results. Silas and his crew had evaporated, leaving behind undeniable evidence of a sophisticated drug trafficking network, exploiting the plant's defunct transport infrastructure to funnel poison across state lines. Recovery in the sterile quiet of a hospital ward brought further revelations about the operation's sheer scale, its insidious roots running deep beneath years of neglect. My accidental intrusion had severed its main artery, yet the grim satisfaction of survival and exposure was perpetually shadowed by a gnawing dread. Silas and his associates remained specters in the wind, and I bore the face that could condemn them. Protection was offered, a flimsy shield against determined predators. Discharged, I vanished, fled the city, shed my name like snakeskin, sought anonymity across the continent. A new identity, a forced attempt at mundane existence. But the factory night was a persistent ghost, whispering in the sudden creak of floorboards, lurking behind the eyes of strangers. Time bled into months, then years. The hypervigilance began, ever so slowly, to recede. A new job materialized. Tentative connections formed. The notion of a future, once inconceivable, flickered faintly. Then, one unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, across a busy street, my blood froze. Silas, unmistakably him, his gaze drifted, then snagged on mine. Recognition flared in his eyes, a spark rekindling a dormant nightmare. I didn't hesitate. I ran. So now I write this from another borrowed city, another temporary haven, the familiar weight of looking over my shoulder settling back upon me. Will the chase ever truly end? Perhaps not. But the alternative, the silence I might have chosen that night, the complicity of looking away, remains unthinkable. How many lives were poisoned by their cargo? Sometimes the counterfactual haunts me. A normal life, purchased with willful ignorance. Deep down, the answer is immutable. Truth possesses its own relentless gravity. My existence is irrevocably altered, scarred by the night shift, yet forged by it too. They can hunt me, but they cannot erase the choice I made when the shadows demanded allegiance. I'll keep moving, stay vigilant, remain one step ahead, because letting them bury the truth, letting them win, that surrender is not coded into my survival. The archaic key, dense and cold in my palm, bore scrollwork that mocked the simple mechanisms securing modern life. Before the cabin's threshold, its timber warped by seasons uncounted, a tremor traced my spine, colder than the alpine air biting my cheeks. Solitude I'd sought, a quiet crucible for the novel simmering within. Yet this place thrummed with a dissonance, an unseen discord. Had I grasped in that moment that twisting this brass skeleton in the lock would disinter a terror far exceeding mere invention. My name is Elara. 40 years I've lived, a weaver of historical fictions, lately dwelling in Portland's rain-soaked embrace. The modest success of my last volume afforded this indulgence, a month sequestered deep within the Cascade Range, a sanctuary advertised with promises of tranquility and vistas to steal the breath. Ideal soil, I presumed, for my next narrative seed. The ascent itself was a pilgrimage through emerald grandeur, roads coiling like serpents through forests of monumental pine. Yet, as the miles dissolved, a peculiar weight settled upon me. The woods grew denser, less welcoming, shadows pooling between trunks with a sentience that daylight ought to have dispelled. An overtaxed mind, I told myself. The phantom limb of too many hours spent driving. The occupational hazard of a storyteller's imagination. Quaint, the cabin appeared. Logs stacked 2 stories high. A generous porch overlooking the valley. Windows like wide, vacant eyes. It might have been lifted from some forgotten folklore. That initial night unfolded without incident. Belongings found their places. The hearth crackled. Nascent ideas tentatively graced my notebook. But sleep, when it came, was thin, perforated by a susurrus seeming to emanate from the very grain of the wood. Faint, unintelligible confidences that evaporated the instant consciousness returned. True strangeness commenced with the second sun, exploring the cabin's eccentricities, familiarizing myself with its bones, my gaze snagged on the hearth. Amongst the river stones composing the great fireplace, one sat askew, subtly defying the mason's logic. Impulse guided my fingers. I pressed. With a muted click, the stone receded. Beside the hearth, a segment of floorboarding pivoted inward, unveiling stairs plunging into absolute black. A thrill, sharp and laced with dread, pierced me. A hidden chamber, the stuff of my own tales made real. Clutching a torch, I descended. Each step drew me deeper into air that grew sepulchral, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something indefinably ancient. The stairwell opened into a compact circular vault. Shelves lined the curved walls, burdened with a bizarre miscellany, leather-bound volumes crumbling with age, stoppered jars containing substances I dared not identify, and nestled amongst them shapes that mimicked with horrifying fidelity the contours of human bone. Yet the room's heart held the true spectacle. A solitary pedestal rose from the stone floor, supporting a tome whose antiquity was palpable. Bound in a leathery material I prayed was not what it resembled. Every nerve shrieked retreat, yet an invisible current drew me forward. Symbols, alien and intricate, were seared into the cover. As my fingers brushed the surface, a galvanic shock coursed through me. Abruptly, the whispers from the night before surged, louder now, insistent, seeming to uncoil from the book itself. Panic seized me. I scrambled backward, up the stairs, bursting onto the porch, gasping the clean, sharp air, my heart hammering against my ribs. What abyss had I stumbled into? An elaborate stage set by some eccentric predecessor, or a malignancy far older? Composure regained, I reached for my phone, intending to summon the rental agency. No signal. Naturally, civilization lay leagues away, down treacherous mountain roads. To call required retreat. Turning back towards the cabin for my keys, I froze. Framed in the window, a visage, gaunt, pallid, its eyes possessing a chilling luminescence in the gloaming. I blinked. It vanished. Sleep became an impossibility that night. The whispers intensified, weaving my name into their sibilant tapestry, urging my return to the subterranean chamber. I fought the summons, but with every passing hour, the unseen tide eroded my defenses. Just shy of dawn, I found myself once more before the gaping floor hatch. This time, hesitation fled. I descended, propelled by a will that felt less and less my own. The book lay open upon its altar now, pages inscribed with the same unsettling glyphs that marked its cover. Drawing near, the whispers climaxed, a deafening psychic roar. My hands fell upon the open pages. The world dissolved. Visions inundated my consciousness, fleeting glimpses of realities unbound by terrestrial physics, architectures conceived in madness, beings of such terrifying alienage that sanity fractured at their periphery. I saw cyclopean cities built from impossible angles, heard tongues no human throat could form, felt the glacial touch of entities coeval with time's first breath. Consciousness returned slowly. I lay sprawled on the vault floor, slick with sweat. The book was closed, yet its latent power pulsed in the stagnant air, a palpable thrum. I stumbled upstairs, mind fractured by the immensity of what I had witnessed. In the ensuing days, I sought refuge in denial, attempting to categorize the experience as a hyper-realistic nightmare. I hurled myself into writing, pages accumulating with feverish speed, but the narrative spooling from my pen bore no resemblance to the historical tapestry I'd envisioned. It was a chronicle of cosmic dread, of abyssal gods and rites that defied language. Night brought no respite. Dreams became extensions of the visions, populated by the entities from the book. I'd wake with a scream caught in my throat, sheets twisted like shrouds, my skin sometimes bearing faint, intricate symbols that vanished with the morning light. A week bled into the next. The landscape around the cabin began to warp. The forest seemed to hunch, trees contorting into postures nature never intended. Wildlife grew scarce. The few birds sighted seemed subtly malformed. their calls dissonant, grating. Departure was the logical imperative, yet some tether held me fast. The book whispered promises of gnosis, of power beyond mortal ken. Each day found me spending longer hours in the hidden room, poring over its cryptic verses, absorbing its forbidden lore. Immersed in the tome's abyssal depths, the true structure of existence began to unveil itself. Our perceived reality, a fragile membrane stretched taut over horrors unimaginable, and I, through some inexplicable cosmic lottery, had become a nexus, a bridge between spheres. Under the full moon of my third week, I enacted the ritual detailed in the book's final brittle pages. As the arcane syllables spilled from my lips, the fabric of the world seemed to fray and buckle. The cabin walls dissolved like mist, revealing a chasm teeming with stars, cold and infinite. And then I beheld them, the ancient ones, the cosmic titans glimpsed in vision. They were devastation and beauty entwined, their mere presence a force threatening to pulverize my consciousness. Yet they offered no destruction. Instead, they spoke, their thoughts branding themselves onto my soul, imparting truths of the universe no human mind was built to contain. They illuminated my purpose, the role I was destined to play in the metamorphosis to come. When awareness solidified, the log cabin was naught but memory. In its stead reared a monolith of impossible geometry, a fane consecrated to the ancient ones. And I was irrevocably altered. No longer entirely human, I had become something other, a seer, a harbinger of age dawning. Even now, as I commit these words to paper, I feel the partitions between worlds thinning, growing permeable. Soon the ancient ones shall stride forth from their cosmic slumber, and the reality we have known will be unmade and remade. Some will lament this as apocalypse, the end. I perceive its true nature, not cessation, but genesis, a cosmic transfiguration that will inaugurate an era of profound terror and sublime wonder. To any who might read this testament, understand, the quiet cabin nestled in the woods was never merely shelter. It was a threshold, a crucible wherein I was reforged, and while a fragment of my being mourns the woman I was, the greater part thrills to the entity I have become. The key that unlocked a simple cabin door simultaneously unlatched the cosmos. Now, as the stars wheel into alignment and the great old ones stir, I stand poised to hold that door wide, to welcome their terrible majesty back to a world that has forgotten. The whispers have swelled to a celestial choir, and soon, very soon, all shall hear its song. And in hearing, they will grasp the truth I now embody, that measured against the infinite, our lives, our world, all we cherish, are but ephemeral thoughts in the dreams of slumbering gods.